Welcome back to Investment 360. Well, recent developments in the ICT sector include a delay in cutting mobile termination rates in Kenya, bombing of cell phone towers in Nigeria, and the continual tension between Telkom and the government in South Africa. Peter Takandesa, ICT analyst at RMB Morgan Stanley, joins us in studio for more. Well, let's start on with the most dramatic of those events, of course, the bombing of cell phone towers in Nigeria. How do you contend with that as a mobile operator?
It's a difficult one, Bronwyn. It's, you've got a patient in the ICU, then power just goes off. Maybe I can put that as an analogy. But what exactly is happening in Nigeria is that you've got quality of service issues, which the regulator has been very angry about over time. Then now suddenly you've got, those towers again being blasted, fire everywhere. So it's quite a concern. At this stage, it's still really at a small scale. We're talking of about 25 to 30 towers out of 20,000 towers in the market. So it's still at a small scale, but nevertheless quite concerning.
And how does it impact the share price of players in Nigeria, such as MTN?
Yeah, I think it's just MTN, honestly. All the other things are not, they're not directly sort of visible on that. It's quite small, those divisions versus their listed companies. But look, I think, as I said earlier, maybe at this stage, it's not really big enough to move the dial. But if it were to continue, then it becomes quite a real issue. Nigeria is very important to MTN. About 40% of their EBITDA, if you want, of earnings comes out of Nigeria. So that's very, very important.
With regards to these kind of moves, obviously you have, between a rock and a hard place. Basically, the government's forcing MTN to take information down to catch terrorists, and terrorists aren't very happy about that. With that being said, do you think there's any possibility that MTN may have to actually, allot certain capex for repairs, etc.? And in addition, there was, I think, a rumor that one of the offices was also bombed, not just the towers. Is there any danger towards personnel as well?
Yeah, look, when those things happen, the fear at the moment, if you talk to a number of people, is that, those bombings could sort of spread from the towers to buildings and to many other places. So there's always the risk that that happens. But I think more importantly, you touched on, having to spend more on the infrastructure. If that was to affect, say, maybe half of their network, that would amount to quite a significant investment. They have invested over $10 billion over the past sort of 6 to 10 years. So you can imagine what they would need to put into the network.
As you said, this is relatively small and contained at the moment. However, at 156 Rand, what is your investment case around MTN in light of news flow like this?
Look, investment case, let's start on the positive. Then we can get into the negative. We've already touched on some of the, the risks that sort of present to an MTN investor. The positives, again, MTN, I think the strongest case, the strongest point to MTN investment case is sort of a diversified revenue base. You've got Nigeria going through such issues. Nigeria was actually quite disappointing at the interim results to June. Very weak growth, about, less than 5% growth for such a market. But you saw South Africa, you saw Iran and all the other places coming through to offset some of that weakness. So that's very important, sort of a diversified revenue base. Then the second issue being, of course, cash returns. As some of these markets mature, capex or investment is coming down and MTN becoming more cash generative and sort of rewarding shareholders with cash returns. Yeah.
But do you really think that markets are maturing? I mean, looking at the US right now, we're having a whole new, like the LT stuff is coming online, etc. Won't that in fact involve a whole lot more capex for MTN, or will they be able to adjust the existing infrastructure to actually support the new kind of data burden, let's say, coming through?
That's right. I get your point. I think the point is the key point is that when you upgrading technology, it costs much less than when you are putting the network for the first time. You probably maybe spend half of what you would spend if you were putting the network for the first time into a country. Yeah.
Let's move now to East Africa, where they are cutting mobile termination rates, and of course that's going to impact Safaricom. What bearing is it going to have on the investment case around Safaricom?
Actually, it's a positive at this stage in the sense that the president intervened and sort of postponed or delayed the cutting of the termination rates. They were supposed to move from about 2.21 at this stage to about 160. which of course last time when that happened, they reduced termination rates, which is the wholesale rate between the operators, by about 50%, and we saw retail rates following. It's unlike here in South Africa where we see the wholesale rate goes and the retail rates don't follow. The retail rates, of course, being what they charge you and I, the final user.
So at the end of the day, it's good for the consumer in Kenya.
If they were to go down, yes, it's good for they have been so far good for the consumer. But so far, I think the president sort of delaying the process is sort of somehow positive for the investor in Safaricom.
But isn't it inevitable that it is going to happen?
They will probably do at some stage. But one thing I can say is that Kenya, they've already gone much lower than even South Africa, Nigeria. Kenya, they're just about 3 US cents per minute. South Africa, about 7 cents. And Nigeria is about 5 cents or so. So they're already much lower.
Would you be buying Safaricom at current levels?
Look, we're positive on Safaricom, we're overweight, and the reason for that is, one, the market, if we look at Kenya versus, say, South Africa, it's still an under-penetrated market, about 80% penetration, call it. We are here over 130 or more, still counting, probably a bit higher than that. And also they've gone through very painful price war, which now we're starting to see some signs of stabilization. It's not looking that, expensive. If you look on any multiples you want, the dividend yield about 6%, so reasonable. So that's sort of the key investment case behind Safaricom at this stage.
And of course, we spoke about MTN being diversified. Does Safaricom have any plans to actually expand, make its base beyond Kenya to a significant extent? I mean, obviously, people are saying that Africa is the new frontier. I mean, obviously, if you are in East Coast, West Coast, South Africa, wherever it may be, you obviously want to get into the rest of the markets. Is there anything that Safaricom is doing or is planning to do that's going to make you believe that's going to be happening?
Safaricom's position has been that they're not going to go to these other countries. I think that goes back to their agreement with one of their parents, Vodafone. Vodafone has largely chosen, Vodafone itself or Vodacom to be the vehicle to invest into other parts of Africa. For example, if Safaricom was to enter Tanzania, then they would be competing with Vodacom. Then to Vodafone, I don't think that's sort of an appealing prospect.
Let's chat a bit about Datatech and where you think Datatech is going in the local space. Of course, with the disappearance of Dimension Data, Datatech is squarely in the spotlight as the big IT player in the country.
That's right. Very interestingly, it's now actually bigger than Telkom. By market cap,
well,
that is.
That's
by
because the one has gone in the other direction as a result of negative news.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Look, I think the most attractive part to Datatech, if one looking into the investment case, is the investment that they're making into emerging markets, particularly Latin America and Asia. They've traditionally just been a developed market business, so that is sort of one thing that we've before complained about. Maybe you need to do much more into that space. So I think it's well deserved that the market cap is going that way, or the share price, if you want, whichever way you look at it. It's well deserved because of the the diversification that they've brought into the table, the growth rates that they're sort of tapping into.
Okay. And a more general kind of question, if one looks at, for instance, Israel, very small country, but the amount of tech companies that comes out of it, and not just the stuff that we're talking about right now, like the mobile operators or infrastructure builders, etc. But we're talking about the innovative companies. Why don't we see that kind of similar growth in the African continent? I mean, it's a much larger, of course, not as educated the population, but there's a large number of educated people. Why don't we see those kind of moves happening in Africa? What can be done about that?
Look, we've had a number of firsts coming out of South Africa, of course. We know in the telecom space, prepaid model, all these things, that started here. But yeah, again, to your point, I think it's much more, we have been behind on a number of issues. If you look, for example, broadband penetration, we're far behind a number of these other countries that you're talking about. We're only starting recently to have alternatives in terms of international fiber connectivity. We only had a single fiber coming into South Africa, so which was quite a challenge. I think that that's one of the key areas that have not been working well for Africa in general, as well as of course investments into the space. I don't think that we've invested a lot into innovation. Technology in particular versus other.
Well, you made the comment that Datatech is larger than Telkom from a market cap perspective, and Telkom we keep seeing buffered by news flow, argy-bargy between government and Telkom. Where are we going with this play?
I think, look, if you look at the share price, we've gone back again to around the 18 level, and that's clearly saying, investors are saying, they are somehow disappointed that, the minister was supposed to come back to report, on alternatives for Telecom after they blocked KT, but we saw the time that was allocated sort of passed without anything. So I think investors.
So it's a lack of communication that
really
is driving this share price lower.
Exactly. Very good assets, lack of communication. Investors are just saying, we want to see that before we commit to any investment into this
country. But then, sorry, Viv, I know you want to jump in there. Isn't it the buy of the century? You say very good assets. Isn't that the underpin here in terms of buying Telkom at 18 Rand? No matter what happens, even if the thing is broken up at the end of the day, you're going to make money because of the quality assets.
That's our thinking, that, at this stage, the risks are still there, but we think the upside is probably more than the downside from here. Being again that, how long is it going to last before we get to a solution? I think they clearly understand what needs to be done at this stage. They have seen all the pressure that is affected.
Speaking of Telkom, obviously the big thing on the table is the possibility of nationalization. How would you rate that? Is it possible? Is it likely? What's going to happen there?
Or is it just a talking point for journalists?
Yes, true.
Anyway.
And market commentators.
A very interesting talking point. But yeah, look, it's...
Remember to be nice to us, because you're still at my mercy on the show.
Yeah, anyway, I think, look, anything is possible. Look, it's some of the, I think, let me say, I think, the direction that the government is trying to push Telkom towards, it does make sense, but maybe one is just to question, is nationalizing it the answer to that? They're trying to push Telkom towards broadband, towards data. What is the growing part of the South African telecoms market? It is data. So to some extent, they're talking of the right things. But I think, to me, my only concern is that the speed is not good enough. They're just too slow, and it's taking time. Just
following on the data stuff, Telkom obviously is getting into new controversy at the moment, in that its ISP is the only one that can be using that, or being tested for the new 40 megabit per second thing. Yes. Aren't they actually going back into the same territory that got them into trouble before? How can they say that no other ISP can test on it except for their own? Isn't that competition issues again coming into play?
I'm not very sure of the legal sort of implications of that, but what I can say is that, look, we've seen them before. They've done some trials with other ISPs that are not their own. Again, as long as I think it's not commercial offering of the service, maybe technical trials, there is a good chance that probably they'll be allowed to go on. Because again, you can't let everyone onto a platform when you're still testing it. I'm sure even if you were to test your technology, you won't allow everyone to come and see it before it goes.
Peter, thanks very much for your time. Peter Tikandesa, ICT analyst at RMB Morgan Stanley.